this lunch talk will start around 12:30 or start soon?
12:30 it will start. 12:30. And normally it will be finished at 1:30. Today we have a lot of participants. There were more than 90 subscriptions for the meeting. So normally this will be many people joining the conference today. So I will briefly come to that and when I'm officially introducing the speakers. But don't hesitate to become, if you are a researcher investigating transport and mobility related to the Benelux context, or you are a researcher affiliated with an institution located within the Benelux, you can always become members. So I strongly encourage you to become members. We'll come to that later on. Sara, you're dealing the mobility or the logistics part?
I'm doing the urban mobility part. Heleen is going to do the logistics.
Okay. Hi, Heleen.
Hello.
So I just discussed with Sara that Sara will give first the part on urban mobility, and then I'll pass the floor later on
Okay.
you for urban mobility.
I just wanted to check if you guys hear me or not.
Yes, we
Yeah.
see you.
Okay.
Maybe you can try just to share your PowerPoint also to see
Okay,
with the
great. What a relief, because have been having difficulties with Teams not being able to talk. Okay, does that work?
Yes, it works. Perfect.
Okay, so I will have to put it like this, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So we will start at 12:30.
Yeah, I unshared my screen, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And Sara will start? Okay, and we do the Q&A, sorry?
Yes, the Q&A, I think it's best to put it at the end of both of your presentations.
Okay.
Then there's enough time for both of you, and then they can ask the questions and towards both of them.
Okay, that works.
You're seeing my screen as well, right? Now?
Yes.
Because when I put in presentation mode, I don't see the participants anymore. So we'll start in 1 minute. Just as a brief reminder, the session will be recorded, and privacy requirements force me to remind you that the session is recorded. By doing this, I've all informed you. In the seminar, so the presentations will be also made available on the YouTube channel from the Université. So it's 12:30, so we can go ahead. So I would like to welcome you all to the last lunch talk in the series of transport after COVID-19 lunch talks. And today we have the privilege to have Dr. Heleen Buldeo from Université Gustave Eiffel and the old Eiffel, and Sara Tori from the VEB, who will give their talk on the impact of COVID-19 on urban mobility and logistics. Before we start, I would like to just take a little moment of silence for remembering Jacob Pollack, Jaap, who passed away, unfortunately, last end of August. And Jaap was one of the founding members of the BIVEC-GIBET Association. So I guess we take 1 minute silence in honor of Jaap.
Come in. Come in. Come in.
Okay, so all thank you for remembering Jaap for his excellent contribution in the general field of transport economics, and in particular for his contribution to the BIVEC-GIBET. In terms of activities, so if you aren't a member yet of the association and you're working in a Benelux research institute or university, and you're interested in the activities, don't be afraid to become members. Individual membership fees are very low price, so we really entice you to participate. We also know already when the next transport research will take place. That will be in Leuven in 2023. And we have a bi-monthly newsletter that we will launch. And this newsletter will have a word from me. We'll have a dedicated space for the collective members. We have 4 institutions that are co-sponsoring the association that will have their place. And I think it's also useful for having an outlook of what the different members of BIVEC-GIBET are doing in terms of research. So the goal is also to have an update of the different papers published by the different members of the association. And the first issue will be launched next month. So I strongly encourage you to submit your DRA. I will send a specific email to the members that they get the information on how and when to submit their contribution. That way, the newsletter can also serve as an outlet to inform the other members on the realization within the different research teams that are members of the BIVEC Association. With no further delay, I will now be happy to pass the floor to Sara and Tori, who will tell us about the impact on urban mobility.
Great, thank you, Mario. I will share the presentation. Okay. No, you see the presenter mode, right?
Not.
Yes, we see the presenter one.
Yes, yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, as Mario said, I'm Sara Tori and I'm a PhD student at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. And I would like to present to you research that we did analyzing how the COVID-19 crisis can be a catalyst for sustainable urban mobility transition, and it is focused on Brussels, Belgium. So first of all, to kind of start off with, so we set out with the research question and we wanted to know how the COVID-19 crisis can support the transition to a more sustainable urban mobility system, focusing on Brussels, Belgium. And the way we went about analyzing that is through this framework. This is a framework of the 8 A's. And so basically the right side of the figure is the actions that we would need to do, and the left side of the figures are the preconditions that need to be met in order to have a transition towards a more sustainable urban mobility system. So we start off with awareness, and awareness is the awareness of the costs associated with mobility and travel. Avoidance is avoiding unnecessary travel. Act and shift is a shift to less congested hours or different modes of transport. And anticipation of new technologies are the new technologies available to support the transition. In light of those actions that we need to do, there are some conditions in order for this to be successful. The first one is actor involvement, namely how the different actors in the transition can participate, because they can either hinder or accompany the transition. Acceleration is a policy framework that is pointing in the direction of sustainability, so the importance of having such a framework. And then alter or adapt behavior. This is the change of individual behavior for the transition to go ahead. And then the 8th factor is all on board, which is the condition really to make the first 7 A's work, is that this needs to be kind of a collective movement. So what we did in order to analyze this potential transition due to COVID-19 was that we had a mixed method approach to the problem. So we started off with a quantitative data analysis. So we collected time series data of different transport modes, namely cars, bikes, and then public transports in the region of Brussels. And we compared these to a benchmark before the crisis to see how they changed during the period that we will be analyzing. We also had a second approach, a second part, which is a qualitative newspaper analysis. So we looked at newspaper articles in Bruz, which is a newspaper focusing on Brussels specifically. De Morgen and Le Soir are more national newspapers, but they do also have articles pertaining to Brussels. So when there was no overlap, we analyzed those as well to kind of come and complement the quantitative data analysis to understand the changes that we saw as well in the data. And so we looked at this over the time period from March 18 to November 18, 2020. And we divided that time period in subsections because it is quite a long amount of time. So we identified, for example, pre-COVID period, a strict lockdown. We had a gradual release in May, the summer period, and then we had back to school in September and a light lockdown starting in October. Based on this, what were our results? So, of course, as you can obviously expect, there was a general decrease in mobility in Brussels. But there were some differences in the different transport modes. If we look at cars, for example, this is the road traffic volume compared to a benchmark before the crisis. So we see a huge drop during the strict lockdown because we weren't able to really move during the strict lockdown. So both on weekdays and weekends, we see this really harsh decrease, this really big drop. That kind of goes back up during the gradual release, goes back down in the summer, and then we approach back to normal at the beginning of the school year. And with the light lockdown in October, we drop again, but not as significantly as we did during the strict lockdown. We see this also in the metro occupancy rates. I've chosen the metro graph, but we see a similar situation for bus, trams, and trains as well in the Brussels area. One of the exceptions, I would say, was biking. This is a graph showing the biking behavior in Brussels based on the different bike counters in the capital. And so we see during the strict lockdown that compared to the pre-COVID benchmark, we have a drop in weekdays, but then we started seeing a really important increase on the weekends. So this could point towards an uptake in biking as a recreational hobby over the weekends. But then this starts to translate as well over the gradual release in more weekday biking. And we see the same during the beginning of the school year, so right after the summer, indicating there might be a shift towards biking as a commuting mode after the strict lockdown during the pandemic. In terms of the thematic analysis, so we used the framework of the 5 first A's, act and shift, actor involvement, avoidance and awareness, and anticipation, to codify what we saw in the newspapers. And as a general rule, we saw that most of the measures taken in Brussels to hinder the spread of COVID-19 ended up being favorable to mobility. This includes closing streets to give people more space to walk and social distance. There were closing of parks and stuff like that. Unfavorable mobility measures included, for example, the fact that parking fees were not collected during the whole month of the strict lockdown. And then in terms of types of measures, we see that the overall majority were aimed really at act and shift, so encouraging a shift to either a different transport mode or to less congested hours of the day. In terms of actor involvement, we thought it would be interesting to analyze sentiments of the actors expressed in the newspapers. And so we see overall that the majority of sentiments are positive. However, the majority of actors that get a say in the newspaper articles are politicians. So that can be a bit of a bias, also because a lot of them are from the Ecolo-Groen majority, so the Green Party, that also is responsible for mobility at the moment in Brussels. In terms of citizens, we see a bit more mixed feelings. So we thought it would be interesting to see exactly how the feelings evolved over time. And this is also where we see an interesting, something interesting appear, is that the positive sentiments overall appeared at the beginning of the pandemic, so during the strict lockdown, with a peak in May. But then after the summer, these kind of positive feelings go away in a sense, and we have a rise in negative feelings. One of the causes, and I'll discuss this a bit later on as well, is that, or a possible cause, is that people weren't really implicated in the applications of the measures. And during the strict lockdown, it was as it was. But then during the summer, as things started to normalize, they might have wanted a bit more involvement. So based on this mixed methods approach, in terms of the 5 first A's, what do we actually see? A first interesting thing that came from the press analysis is that, as a general rule, we associate awareness with awareness of negative externalities of mobility. So air pollution, noise pollution, traffic. However, with the pandemic, we saw that a lot of people got access to a positive awareness of what citizens could see the city look like if there was less traffic, if there was less cars, if there was more space for citizens and for active mobility. So this was really a shift in terms of awareness, going from something negative to something positive, which also led to some awareness campaigns in Brussels, for example, centered around the importance of continuing to bike even after the lockdown, to just really continue this positive feeling associated with the side effects of the pandemic. In terms of avoidance, we of course saw 3 major consequences. So overall mobility decrease, because we weren't able to go anywhere. We also saw that telework became the norm overnight. And in the press analysis, this was something that was hugely discussed, making it seem really as an important consequence on mobility. And we also saw a potential breakthrough of e-commerce. But we see that in terms of our analysis, we were unsure about the overall effects on sustainability, because moving towards full e-commerce can be beneficial. But if people start, of course, going to the shops to check out items or goods they want to buy beforehand, or they return them themselves afterwards, this can have a bit of a mitigation effect. In terms of anticipation, what we saw in the data, we also looked at car sales data, and we saw that there was a drop in internal combustion engine sales, while the sales of electric vehicles increased significantly. We also saw that the digitalization really accelerated the movement and allowed actually for some of the other A's to take place. What do I mean by that? For example, cloud computing or ICT departments helping local businesses setting up an e-commerce have really accelerated avoidance behavior. So they gave us the possibility to telework through cloud computing. They gave people the option to shop online. So they really accelerated these ICT deployments. In terms of act and shift, so we see here in the analyses that public transport appears to be, for the time frame, the biggest loser during the crisis. There was a fear of contagion, so a fear of getting on public transport, and also a deliberate act by the Brussels government during the pandemic to just leave public transport to those who really need it, so those who don't have an alternative. So people didn't really use public transport during the crisis, and even now we see that it hasn't really returned to pre-COVID levels. So most measures that we saw are related to act and shift, and here we really see an effort to promote active mobility while taking away space from cars or reducing speed limits. And especially when it comes to cycling, these measures seems like they're having a positive effect on behavior change. So like we saw in the graph, this kind of conversion from recreational cycling to commuting cycling that was seen before and after the summer can really indicate a shift towards cycling as a commuter mode. However, one of the things that we also saw during the analysis is that even though we entered a light lockdown in October, right before that, traffic data indicated a return to normal for cars. So public transport lost appeal, and car traffic returning to business as usual faster than public transport may indicate that there is still a negative modal shift in response to passengers' fear of using public transport. The last A of the initial analysis is actor involvement. And here, as I said, most actor sentiments are extremely positive, but they were mostly made, the comments were mostly made by politicians. And we did see evolution in the sentiments. And so here, during the lockdown and during the summer months, sentiments were positive, but we could see that after the summer, there seemed to be a regularization. So the COVID crisis seemed to normalize, and most notably, citizens really wanted a return to normal. There was this kind of big discussion, polarizing discussion in the city around the Bois de la Cambre, which is one of Brussels' biggest park. This was completely closed during the strict lockdown and then partially reopened up for traffic, but not completely. And this led to really heated discussions between citizens standing on opposing sides of the debate. And so we see that as the new measures had to be introduced very quickly, there wasn't really any time for feasibility assessments or stakeholder consultations or participatory planning. And most measures, unfortunately, are temporary. So they didn't really require major changes in infrastructure. And so this means that the measures can also more easily be revoked. So what does this mean in terms of long-term outlook? And here we try to answer this in terms of the last two A's, acceleration and adaptation of behavior. And acceleration, we see that there is a need to have a policy framework that is really pointing towards sustainability. So this policy framework can really accompany and support a transition. Brussels had Good Move. So Good Move is the regional mobility plan for the capital. And a lot of the changes underway described in Good Move were accelerated thanks to the pandemic. So we already had a policy framework pointing in the right direction, but we see that it is crucial to get actors on board when implementing the changes anyways, because otherwise the lasting effect might be mitigated. We also recommended continued investment in telework and public transport. So we saw during the pandemic that the relationship between employers and employees and the trust relationship changed. And the new agreements between the two parties would need to be formalized with regards to telework, because this could really help foster a transition in the long term. And public transport definitely does not need to be left behind. We need to continue investing in it, because that way we can avoid overcrowded vehicles again, which was one of the fears during the start of the pandemic. In terms of the last A, adaptation, we see that the first extreme lockdown was not really long enough to permanently change people's habits, but there might have been a change in relationship between attitudes and behavior, in a sense that there are dissonant bicycle and public transport users. So people who have a positive attitude towards the use of either biking or public transport, but in their behavior don't actually bike, for example, because they're afraid, they don't know how to do it, the infrastructure is not right, so they can't. In a sense, the fact that the measures put in place made it easier, safer, and more relaxing to bike could mean that there is a realignment between the people who couldn't bike and wanted to, and so there's a realignment in their attitudes and behavior. This can have positive implications on the longer term, because if you have this alignment between your attitude and your behavior, you will have more stable mobility patterns in the long run, so you will continue biking. In terms of public transport, we hope as the change in behavior, people not using public transport was brought on by negative safety aspects. If and when these disappear, we can hope that people actually come back to public transport, because this was the way they moved around in the first place. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I think we'll have the questions after Heleen's presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So indeed, we will ask all the questions after Helen's presentation. So Helen, if you could share your slide.
Yes. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Well, good lunch break, everyone. So my name is Heleen Buldeo. I am currently working in a research chair at the Université Gustave Eiffel in Paris. But previously I worked as well in MOBI, the MOBI research group of the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. in my presentation, I will focus on goods transport and deliveries in cities. And this presentation is based on a number of studies that we did at the research chair together with Laetitia Dablan, and also in collaboration with colleagues from other institutions. But I will show that in a minute. So first of all, goods transport has changed.
Just a small remark, Heleen. We only see your introductory slides and not in full screen yet.
Oh, so I see them in full screen. Let me try that again. Did anything change or not?
No, now you're on the second slide, but we don't see it in full screen yet.
You can just swap presenter mode in your presentation if you swap presenter and the other screen.
I don't really know how to do that. Here? Did this work? No.
Nothing yet.
Mario? Did something change? Is it full screen now?
No.
Oh.
It's in your display settings. You swap presenter view and slideshow. If you go on your full screen presentation that you see on, if you have another screen, it's probably on there, and you swap the.
No, I don't have another screen.
Oh.
I only have this screen. And sometimes it works like this, so I don't really know why it doesn't work.
Like this, we see basically almost all, so this will work.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's try to make it work in this way then. So sorry.
Don't worry.
Okay. So we were on this screen, right? The second one. Okay. Okay, so I hope everything is clear, and otherwise I will send you the presentation afterwards, and we can also go more into details in the Q&A. Just to give like to give a starting point of this presentation, we added some facts and figures about the context in which we did our research on deliveries and goods transport throughout the pandemic, and where the first lockdown in France, there was a very strict lockdown. I think maybe even a bit more strict than it was in Belgium. And then from March to May, which was followed afterwards by strong curfews, partial lockdowns, and other measures. And so we started this research a few weeks into the first lockdown. And so looking back on the events of the last 1.5 years, we could say that goods mobility remained quite stable, apart from some shortages really in the beginning of the pandemic, but which was overall quite limited. E-commerce, of course, has changed a lot and has increased basically everywhere. We've seen an increase in this year from the last year by 30% of goods bought online in France, or an increase twice as high as usual. There are also interesting numbers from other cities, such as New York, for example, who are on a daily total of 2.4 million packages per day now, which are insane numbers, and of course have big impacts on how we organize goods transport in cities. What we've also seen is really acceleration of the Omni-Channel retail model, where click and collect is like the most adopted type of organizing this. So meaning that shops who had, or retailers who had shops, also have introduced web shops or moved basically to their web shops, and then organizing click and collects or even shipments from their store network throughout this whole time. And we've seen now in 2021 that these consumption habits that basically accelerated, or they were not new, but they accelerated quite dramatically, that they remained. And so what we're seeing now in a lot of cities around Europe, but also in other cities in North America, for example, is this shift towards quick commerce, of Q-commerce, where a bunch of new companies have entered the market, opening up tiny warehouses in cities to offer grocery deliveries in under 15 minutes. And so all of this, of course, has an important impact on mobility and goods mobility in particular. So what I will show in this presentation are the results of 4 studies that we started doing in the beginning of the lockdown and then carry out throughout. So the first survey that we did together with, so I organized this together with Laetitia Dablanc, and we set up a daily kind of micro survey really quick with only a couple of questions every day that we send out to a panel of delivery operators, really different in terms of what their operations were, small companies, big companies, very focused on urban deliveries. Some others were basically all over France carrying out their activities, some B2C, some B2B. And so we sent them a really short survey every day, which they responded to quite well. They were, what we found throughout the data collection, in fact, was that specifically these stakeholders were quite happy sharing their experiences throughout these strange times. We asked them the questions about their perceived volumes compared to normal times, but also how their staff management was working out for them, traffic conditions, how they experienced these, but also how easily they could access basic health material like masks and so on, which in the beginning was still a big issue. And then we also complemented these daily service with a weekly service to the 4 large freight organizations or associations. Then another survey that we included as well in our research is, or another study, contains semi-structured interviews with stakeholders, also from the delivery or from the goods transport industry, so logistics service providers and shippers, as well as local public authorities managing goods mobility. A third study that we included is a survey that was sent out to the members of an association called Affilog in France, which is an association that among its members has logistics real estate developers, but also architects and companies who focus on logistics real estate. And so a survey was sent out in a range of months throughout 2020, asking them about their experience situation. And then the 4th survey, the most recent one, among delivery platform gig workers or Uberized workers who carry out all the meal deliveries in many cities, as well in Paris, which was the 4th round of surveys that has been done specifically on this with these workers, with these they're working for these platforms. And so we did this survey in February of this year, and there we could really see some effects as well compared to the year before, and a COVID effect. So moving on into the first study that we did, and what you can see here is the results of one of the questions that we asked to our panel, where we asked them to describe like their level of activity at this point compared to normal times. So what you can see here is that there was really an extreme variability of activities and big differences as well in sectors. Obviously, big differences among companies serving a B2B audience or a B2C audience, and then among the B2B players. There was also a large difference in the ones that had mostly business in the essential services or essential sector, and the one that didn't. So the ones that serving restaurants, for example, or supplying restaurants and shops, they had to find new markets and accelerated towards other activities. What we found is that there was a big shift from B2B to B2C, where there was a growing activity, as we all know by now. There we saw a shift in types of goods that people ordered online, where there was also like a very cyclical ordering pattern of the goods that were bought, which changed a lot, especially in the first lockdown throughout the phases of the lockdown development. And then also a big shift in destinations with stores closed, meaning that also collection points were closed, which caused all the parcels to go to different to people's houses, kind of like largely increasing the number of destinations. Overall, traffic conditions were a lot better, obviously, with people not moving at all. So for goods transport, that could have been seen as a good thing, but it was counterplayed, on the other hand, by less return freight. So lots of empty returns, which had its impact on productivity on the sector as well. Difficulties with staff organization, people taking care of their children, for example, sick leaves, a fear of getting sick, and so on. So all these were really impactful on our panel of companies that we surveyed every day. There were municipal initiatives as well, which also were important for our panel, and some of them got involved in the, for example, web pages and applications that were launched in order to connect local businesses that offered or that wanted to offer home deliveries to companies that could do these deliveries, and then showing to consumers where they could buy online. But also, for example, for big markets, big food markets, who normally only sell to B2B, like restaurants, most importantly, were set up as well services to get all these goods to consumers instead of to businesses. What we've also seen is a kind of maturation of platforms, or the platform economy, shown specifically by mergers, not mergers, but the collaborations between platforms such as Deliveroo and Uber Eats with big grocery supermarket chains like Carrefour and the Casino Group, which has Monoprix and so forth. In France, and especially for urban deliveries and fast urban deliveries of groceries. And so these collaborations, these partnerships, they continue to date, are really giving a lot more importance to this kind of platforms. Then moving on to the people that actually work for these platforms, so the gig workers, or the delivery people within this gig economy. Below you can see a graph showing the type of people working for these platforms and their activities. So in light green, you can see the workers who say that they have a full-time job next to their who work full-time for these platforms. In blue, you can see the students who also study next to the work for their platforms. And then in gray, you can see people who also have another job and carry out deliveries for these platforms next to that. And so from the beginning of these surveys that were done every year, there was, or that started in 2016, you can see that the students are active on these platforms, so like the initial workers carrying out these deliveries, they gradually decreased throughout the years, but increased again after the crisis. So more students on the job, in this way reversing a really strong trend. And so among the people that we surveyed in the beginning of this year, over 30% said to have turned to this activity because of the pandemic, and this percentage was even more than 60% among students. Remarkably, regardless of the volumes that increased, the pandemic has led to a decrease in income for more than half of the delivery workers. And they also say, more than half of them, that the pandemic has worsened their working conditions. What we've also seen is an increase in transport modes that are illegal, among others, mopeds and cars, which are strictly regulated in France. You can only use them if you have a specific freight license, which most of these delivery workers don't have. And also the use of the shared bicycle system that the city organizes or provides, which is not allowed for deliveries, but are used anyway. Then logistics real estate did well, which it came in 2019 from a very strong year. So lots of logistics facilities being built and sold. As you can see here on this slide is the evolution of warehousing activity levels that the members of ACLILOG, the association, estimated as compared to normal times as well. And so in red, you can see less activities, gray, same activities, and more activities in green. And so throughout the year, we can see that the activities recovered, although there was an increase, although there was a decrease, but only by 7% compared to 2019. Staff reorganization and health restrictions were obviously a very big issue or a very big concern and a reason for reorganizations within the warehouses. And in April 2020, there was also a court ruling forcing Amazon to close its temporarily close its warehouses in France, which led to warehouses being used for delivering the French market from Germany, for example. The main issue for warehouse developers or actors within logistics real estate was the administrative delays in getting their permits, and also nurturing the relationships with their clients and with the ones that are using their facilities. So in a paper that we developed based on these surveys, we made this table to show like the mood changes between from March to October. As I said, showing showing mostly the difficulties with getting the permits, the changes in the pandemic and all the different measures reflected in this as well. And then maybe the most important one is a worry among logistics real estate developers and stakeholders within this field is the loss of the sector's image with the general public, and really anti-Amazon feelings that were really strong in France throughout last year. Among the different stakeholders that we included in our studies, we can see very different capacities to adapt and disruption that they experienced throughout last year, throughout the pandemic, where there are very different concerns and there are very different adaptations levels required or not, going from policy actors to the different actors within the delivery sector and the logistics sector. So lots changed, for example, for the actors in the B2B sector, where offices and restaurants and so on were closed, moving into B2C, where there was an explosion of delivery addresses and higher volumes, and then the administrations trying to take care of this all. Moving on to policy responses. So in the short term, we've seen lots of quick responses to urgency at the local level during the lockdown, for example, delivery time windows that were relaxed to facilitate logistics and to facilitate deliveries in the city. As I said, initiatives to support local businesses that wanted to carry out their activities, but then with a delivery service attached. In the longer term, we've seen that logistics urban logistics was mostly omitted or kind of unaccommodated in several post-lockdown initiatives. So there was a lot of talk about reinventing the city and changing the city for the better, where we could see, for example, the terraces, like famously developed on loading zones and unloading zones, causing some difficulties for the sector in order to do their activities as well. We've also seen like 50 kilometers of Corona lanes developed in Paris, which are still there, which are and really interesting for cargo bicycles that carry out deliveries. And we have really seen that it's really clear in the city that the uptake of cargo bikes is it's really visible. For other freight vehicles, this this is not this doesn't really help them in the issues that they are experiencing. For example, moving to electric freight or electric vans, where there is need for other types of infrastructure. So moving into 2021, we are seeing emergent strategies to accommodate urban logistics and to make it more efficient, zero emission, where cargo bicycles are really supported by the city of Paris and different cities throughout France. There are lots of experiments with micro-hubs, mobile micro-hubs that can be put in place to organize more efficiently local deliveries. And then there's an exemption of on-street parking for motorcycle and mopeds, as I said, used quite a lot by gig delivery workers, but only if they're electric. And so going into the future, we of urban logistics in the post-pandemic world, which seems to be quite near, the focus on new technologies in order to assist delivery operations and logistics operations in cities is really up for debate. So as well for carrying out these deliveries, as we've seen with delivery robots, drones that are used for deliveries, and getting easier authorization to try them out, to pilot them. We've seen that especially in China and in the United States. Here in France, there were no at this time no pilots that launched throughout the pandemic, although the traffic situation was really interesting to test these kind of vehicles out. But that might be coming up next or in the future. Also new technologies in order to facilitate zero emission zone or low emission zones that are not yet used a lot in France and are very restricted in their use. And also for capturing data about what is leaving in this and what is leaving and entering the city, what is happening in the city in terms of goods mobility. There's a lot of focus as well on the situation of gig workers who received a lot of attention as well, not only the gig workers, but delivery staff in general, as having an essential function as well in delivering the cities and the cities and its inhabitants. And then we are seeing an accelerated willingness to implement zero and low emission zones, which will also be very interesting to see how goods mobility will adapt, and then specifically the status of trucks and how they will be able to still play a role, or the possibility that they still can be used in cities with zero or low emission zones, specifically taking into account efficiency as well. So this work has been carried out from the Logistics City Chair, and we have lots of information as well available on our websites, reports, presentations, and so on. And we also have an e-commerce mobilities observatory where we share facts and figures about mobility with regards to e-commerce. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Heleen. And again, thank you very much, Sara Marie. So let's first already applaud the two presenters for their excellent presentation. So then we can pass through the questions. So please raise your hand if you have questions, and please indicate to who you want to address your particular question. So far, I don't see hands yet. I have already a question. That is Alex. Yes, Alex.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay. Always struggle to unmute. First quick question is, how will the slides of both presentations be circulated? I hope that they will be. So that's my first quick question.
So the presentation and the video itself will already be available on the website. I don't know whether the slides can be distributed as well, but the video of the entire conference will be available on it.
Perfect, thank you. My question is for Heleen for the second presentation. So I guess there's sort of two things. The first one is with these gig workers, how far are these real decent jobs, or how far are we talking about a job market that's kind of become unsustainable, with perhaps conditions that might not be widely understood or proper? And I guess my second question is, you mentioned sort of 15-minute deliveries, and I know from my own experience that riders I tend to see are sort of takeaway delivery drivers. What kind of products are we talking about? And is this sort of a luxury market of people who might be, high income urban workers who can afford to spend a bit extra? So those are my sort of two queries. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for your question. I will answer the second one first. So what we are seeing so far is that it's mostly, so these are companies that are also based, platform-based companies, but because they offer very quick deliveries, they obviously need physical spaces in cities, and because otherwise you can never promise to deliver something in 15 minutes. So a number of these companies, I think they're in Brussels as well, I don't know in the other cities, called Gorillas, Cajou, Dija. Well, I think there are maybe 10 of them right now active in different cities, and mostly very different ones in the same city, and all needing, because they deliver in like a range of 2 kilometers around their mini warehouse called Dark Store, or it's at least in the press, because they use this kind of store space, and some of them have put up shop in previous shops, but then they're closed for public, so they organize only deliveries there in their small warehouses, and so they're mostly focused on groceries, and specifically on the convenience part of it. So there's some that present their services more as like an apéro concept, where you have like alcoholic beverages, and others are more like marketing themselves as in your flexible fridge, for example. But it's mostly like the larger groceries sector, I would say. And what we've seen so far is that the large retail chains have followed this kind of service offering, and even taking a stake in these companies. So Carrefour has invested in Cajou, which is the French platform that organizes or that offers these services. And so in terms of audience that they serve, I'm pretty sure it will be mostly like younger, high earning millennials, I would say. But I'm not 100% sure that this is the target, but that's what I would say, because these are also the people that are using these instant meal delivery platforms most. And then your first question, I forgot. Can you repeat it, please?
No, I think you've answered them both. The first one was about who's buying. Oh, forgive me, you're quite right. It was about the paying conditions of the gig workers.
Yeah.
Is this sustainable? Is there stuff going on that really needs to be regulated and so on?
No, so this is really a worrying trend within logistics jobs or logistics sector. It's always been a sector that is quite where the working conditions are quite difficult, and we're seeing, for example, lots of the parcel delivery companies that are working a lot with subcontractors and subcontractors subcontracting, which is a model that Amazon uses as well, which basically makes sure that you can push down volumes to people, to the delivery workers, and to carry it out regardless of whether this is feasible to do in a day, whether this is feasible to do while taking breaks, and so on. So this is kind of a step further from the working conditions that are already in this sector quite worrisome at some points. And the city has really, like specifically here in Paris, the city has really taken note of these difficulties and is trying to set up programs in order to, for example, let what we've seen so far, for example, is that these delivery workers, they stay within these platforms, working for these platforms, working a lot and making really low money, and also not having any basic rights, in fact, what we consider basic rights in our system. But the question there is, how can we make them transition towards logistics jobs that are where the working conditions are better? So there are programs being set up for that, and also like a house where they in the north of Paris, where they can go to take a break, use bathroom facilities, and so on. Obviously, there can be questions if this is really the tasks of the city to do it, because what about delivery companies that are taking care of their workers? Are they then in a are they then responsible to do this, and they don't profit from any extra support? But this is all being discussed within stakeholder groups where all these stakeholders are involved. So I'm really curious to see what that will give in the next year. And so, but especially it is definitely on the radar of most people working in this industry.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Please raise your hand. Yes, Dominique.
Thank you very much for both of the presentations. I have a question more reflective. What is, for both of the presenters, by the way, what is the balance? I explain what I mean. I'm coming from the tourism field, and last year in 2020, all the presentations were about tourism will never be the same anymore after COVID. And then 2021, I saw already that a lot of people started to say, we missed the momentum to do something really in depth and going into more sustainability of the sector. Is there something comparable going on, or did you come across something comparable, and what might be or not be this missed momentum?
I think it's thank you for the question. I think it's a very good point. It's funny that you say, in terms of mobility, what we see here in Brussels, I understand where you're coming from with the missed momentum. In a way, we've seen numbers at the beginning of the school year here about road traffic being back to pre-COVID levels and congestion actually being even worse than the year before Corona. So I think it's, in a sense, the momentum should have been maybe reforming completely the policy framework that you're working with. But I think when you're working in a sanitary crisis, that is difficult. So I think the way forward is continue to build on what has happened. I saw in Heleen's presentation that in terms of the consumption habits, the COVID consumption habits have apparently stayed for a big part. Urban mobility is a bit more mixed. But I think if we continue to build on what has happened, I'm thinking about in Brussels, the fact that the city became one of the largest Zone 30 cities in Europe. I'm thinking about the fact of the diesel ban planned for 2030 or 2035. So I think if we continue to build on that, even if we didn't take full benefit of the momentum that we could have, we can get there. Maybe a bit slower than we wish, but we are taking profit of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the missed momentum would definitely be right after the first lockdown, where there was a lot of emphasis on as I said a little bit in the presentation as well, focus on rebuilding the city for its inhabitants and so on. But like kind of unfortunately forgetting the fact that people all need their stuff as well, and in order to get your goods at your home or in your local supermarket, both need delivery vehicles or your local restaurant when it's open again. They all need these deliveries, and at one point that this wasn't really a big part of the discussion. with the main example of the loading zones being removed in order to make them into terraces. I think now I think mostly the sector has taken its momentum as well to show that what they're doing, that they're not only creating nuisances in the city, but that it was really inconvenient to not have everything in your supermarket. And so that I think that momentum of showing that maybe we create nuisances, that's true, but we're also an essential activity and really much needed in the city. So how can we together organize this better with all the stakeholders involved? I think that momentum hasn't gone lost at this point. So I'm really curious to see how we will involve, but also very excited, because I think for cities and the general livability of cities while still having access to everything that we need, not taking into account, for example, these 15-minute groceries, because I don't think that is something that we need to go to. And I think the cities are also like looking for a response that they can have towards these kind of developments. I'm really looking forward to see that, and I'm fairly positive that that cities will get better after this crisis.
Thank you very much.
Zimu, I saw that before you raised your hand as well. Do you still have a question?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I've been inspired a lot of one question from Sara. Basically, you talk about the 8 point to adapt like you draw under the circle, the Mobius circle. So I think you mean that with this circle would be the infinities styles in future. So, and you have mentioned about the people why choose to use a new way for logistics and also the for traveling, because one, the policy pressure and also the lifestyles that people cannot often go out to charter and commute with people with other, and like the pre-COVID and also the more e-commerce explode in a COVID period. But and at the end you mentioned that as soon as the finish of the COVID lockdown, and most people, and I would like to turn back the normal lifestyle before the COVID. So, and you mentioned, you said, and the most negative effect, negative feedbacks happened after the COVID, after the lockdowns. So I would like to think that is it possible that people why choose to turn back the normal, the previous lifestyles, because for company that they sort of that the logistic ways they adopt in a COVID period is low efficient and didn't create too much profitability to them. So that's why they turn back. And also for the normal people, because they're forced to change their lifestyle in a COVID, and as soon as the lockdown is finished, so they thought that the better lifestyle is still the same as what happened before the lockdown. So that's why the people, as soon as there's an opportunity, they would like to choose to live in the past instead of to adapt in the future. So as according to this, I would like to ask if you have a kind of research that like a comparison that between the efficient and the profitability happened before the lockdown and in the lockdown and after the lockdown.
So if I understand correctly, you're asking whether we looked at efficiency and convenience levels before, during, and after the lockdown for people?
Yes, and there could be possible that could be a possible reason that's why people choose to live in the past instead of adopt the new ways.
I think you make a good point, and I think especially when I looked at Heleen's presentation, that the COVID consumption habits remain, whereas we see a return to cars for urban mobility. I think it's interesting because I assume convenience does play a role in this, and because it's easier. So that's why one remains and the other one is maybe switching back. But I think, so we haven't looked at making a comparison, and you make an interesting point, but I think it is part of the new policy regulations that are coming, I think, that will make it more convenient to have alternatives as well. So I think that institutionalizing telework or expanding bike lanes and biking infrastructure or walking infrastructure to give people that same convenience that they think they're experiencing driving a car with public transport or an active mode can actually, mitigate that effect a bit, because indeed, in terms of convenience and profitability for people, it must play a role. And people who would want to bike but couldn't in the past have discovered it is now convenient. So continuing in that direction with a solid policy framework that points towards that can definitely play a role, I think. But thank you for the suggestion for the comparison. I think that's an interesting point.
Thank you.
You're muted, Mario.
Sorry. There's one final question by Rashid.
Hello, everyone. Thank you both for the presentation. I have a quick question to Sara Marie. So actually, what I liked the most in the presentation is your conclusion that the measure was not long enough to change the habit, but the impact was there, and it was felt by everyone. My question is, did you feel that officials or politicians, which actually was a part of a positive sentiment in Brussels, has a minimum, or I would say enough awareness about such an impact to implement more rules or regulation for better sustainable urban mobility?
Thank you, Rashid, for the question. It's a very good one. I think in a sense, yes, because I think, like I said, the awareness of people expressed, I think, all over the world about how cities could look like in a positive sense was felt everywhere. And in a way, like I mentioned, Brussels already has this Good Move regional mobility plan that is really ingrained in, it was developed in a very participatory way, and it already points towards a more sustainable mobility future, and it was accelerated with the COVID pandemic. So I think our mobility minister in Brussels at the moment is someone affiliated with the Green Party. So in a sense, I think there is this awareness and there is this wish to capitalize, but Belgium is a very complicated country politically speaking. So I think even with very good intentions, it can take some time. But it's not because of, I don't assume it's because of lack of awareness. Yeah. You're muted again, Mario.
The really last question by Maya.
Thank you very much. It's Maya Piecyk. I'm from University Westminster. Thank you both for very interesting presentations. I very much enjoyed them. We did a lot of work in London. You look like you don't really hear me. So
it's better now.
I'll try to speak louder. So we did a lot of work in London pre-COVID on parcel deliveries and also how it impacts on the gig work. It was really interesting to see how that all changed as a result of this unexpected event. So my question is really to Heleen. Based on different surveys and interviews, study work, did you get a feeling what the key ways both the retailers and the logistics providers dealt with an unexpected sudden surge in demand for online shopping and deliveries? And is there a feeling in the industry, both amongst the retailers and logistics service providers, that this trend will continue, or is it going to go back to the pre-COVID trajectory, or will we reach some critical level and that's where you
Hi, Maya. Thank you for your question. We didn't actually, so retailers weren't part of the interviews or surveys that we did, but obviously we've been tracking for example, the take-up of click and collect. And I think in terms of what will stay in these habits for retailers who have a store network, I think that will be the most important one. And we, what I've seen from the numbers that were published on this, and we also did a small survey among shops in a shopping center, because it adds, like, logistically, it adds a layer of difficulty there as well, because of the way that their infrastructure works. So in this sense, we talked a little bit to shop holders there, or shop managers, and not necessarily the shop owners. And so what it seems to be the most important trend that has that will remain is the logic or the habit of using click and collect. So really ordering online and then going to the shop to maybe try it still or just pick it up. I think that's a convenience that people that didn't discover yet might not abandon anymore. And we've seen that click and collect, although all shops are still open for a while now and are not looking to be closed anytime soon, this is still a habit that seems to be really high. And so I guess this will be something of the future as well. And not only for large retail chains, but also for smaller like independent stores and proximity stores. There could be a worry that the services that they have set up, for example, a web shop, that they did it in a sort of temporary way and to get back into life as usual as before. And that will be for a number of cases that I think that will be definitely the case, but I don't think for the majority. It feels like both on the retail side and on the consumption side, this interaction of online and offline that has really took off or accelerated and won't change anymore, is what I would say.
And from the logistics sector perspective, because they suddenly got a huge demand to deal with.
Yeah. Lots of startups that could scale up. So lots of smaller or more last mile logistics companies that took up larger volumes, and so I think that really accelerated as well their scaling up possibilities, and especially with companies that are fit for the city, with cargo bikes and with micro depots throughout the city that can facilitate their deliveries. So I think for them, what the pandemic has meant for them is, I think, a really important acceleration in the terms of activities that they could, and the volume of activities that they could do. So it might have been a positive for them in the end, to speak of positives, if that's possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you all for the nice interactions, and let us applaud again Sara Marie and Heleen for their excellent presentations and excellent feedback. So as explained before, I will make this video available on the website of BIVEC-GIBET. So those who want to see the presentation afterwards, they can always have again a look on the website of the association. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to see you at one of the coming events of BIVEC-GIBET. Wish you all a nice day.
Thank you, Mario, for organizing.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.